a dark and dreary morning. Let's stand and pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. O heavenly King, the Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere and fillest all things, treasury of blessings, and giver of life, come and abide in us, and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls, O good one. So last week we were talking about the 5 divisions that, according to St. Maximus the Confessor, the human person in the garden was called to unite. And those divisions were between the created and the uncreated, the intelligible and the sensible, heaven and earth, paradise and the inhabited land, and male and female. All right, those are the 5 divisions that are meant to be overcome. And interestingly, there are divisions that I think are existent, and we especially see this with male and female, even before the fall. These are categories of creation. Whenever you create, there is one who creates another. And whenever there is one who creates another, there is naturally a distance or a gulf between them. And last week, remember, we said this astonishing quote, let me get it exactly right. The distance between God and man is not spatial, it's ontological. All right, it's not, the distance between God and man is not spatial, it's ontological. All right, so, and you often hear us say this, that means that God isn't somewhere out there a long way away from us. No, God is right here. Spatially, we are inhabiting the same space in which God is present, everywhere present by the Holy Spirit. But ontologically, there is distance between us because he is uncreated and we are created. So he creates another, and he creates another that's worthy of love, worthy of having a vocation within creation itself. And part of the human vocation as the priest of creation is to unite in themselves all these divisions that are inherently part of creation itself. The problem is, once the fall occurs, those divisions exacerbate. So this vocation to unite in the human person, the divisions of creation itself, becomes amplified by the fall, and we can understand the fall really well when we understand or begin to understand the growing division in these 5 particular spheres of influence, and especially with male and female, because that becomes then very central in the story of the fall. But, you know, we were talking last week about how our connectedness to each other is much, much more dynamic than we can possibly realize. And even until fairly recently, one of those connections wasn't well known on the physical level. And you remember we were talking about the microbiome and how when we share space, we become different, okay? We have, and actually I started off by saying that I read this article in Eon about how the argument was, from a biological standpoint, the human person could never live on another planet, even if we found another planet that was entirely inhabitable, already had life there, had an oxygen environment that was breathable. As soon as we got there, it would kill us. And the argument they were making was basically bacterial, and not just bad bacteria, but good bacteria. The absence of the bacteria which we rely on symbiotically to live biologically, all right? So in other words, we developed physically in this earth, in this space, in this connection, and it's one of the ways that we as human beings end up uniting heaven and earth, or sky and land. We're connected to both. We're connected to the earth. Infants almost entirely on their own and naturally, if you put them on the ground, will scoop up dirt in their hand and put it in their mouth, right? We're horrified by this. This is terrible. There's bacteria in that dirt. Don't you dare do that. They actually need that bacteria because we're connected to the rest of creation through that bacteria. So we have this microbiome in our guts in which trillions of bacterial strains dwell. We have a microbiome of our skin. That's making the rounds for a while. I don't know if you read the same things I read online, but some people are experimenting with washing less, washing their bodies less. Did anyone see this? And the idea is that we have this obsession with cleanliness. We've got to cleanse ourselves from the environment. We've got to get all the, creepy crawlies off of us. And again, this is based on a misunderstanding of our relationship to the environment in which we are created and in which we developed. We actually want bacteria living on us. We want the right bacteria living on us. If the wrong bacteria get on us, that's a problem. But paradoxically, having the right bacteria living on us is part of what protects us from the bad bacteria. This is the whole idea of the microbiome, you see. And studies have been done fairly recently which has shown that when you live with other people, you begin to share a similar profile of your gut bacteria and your skin bacteria, okay? Even if they're not related to you, just to inhabit the same space as other people is to change your biology. And this is fascinating because obviously it means that we're connected in ways that we don't realize. If we don't live with someone, there's a chance that while we are genetically like 98, 99% in our genes, in our DNA expression, we're identical to that other person, we can have zero overlap in our bacterial symbiotic gut bacteria and skin bacteria and everything else. Zero overlap. But when we live with people, that overlap goes up to like 20 to 30% in which we share the same bacteria. Same thing with your animals. If you have dogs, you have the dogs on your lap, you pet them, the dog licks you. The dog, what do you tell kids? Don't let the dog lick you on the lips. They've got germs. Well, studies have shown that when you own dogs, you and your animals, cats or whatever, gerbils, you and your animals have an overlap of bacteria that now connect you. You share them with that animal. Isn't that wild? A single kiss can transfer 30 million bacterial elements between two mouths. 30 million. Which sounds like a lot, but you know how many bacteria live in our mouths? 1 billion is what they estimate. 1 billion bacteria inhabit our nasal tracts and our glands and all these sorts of things. Again, we would not be healthy if that were not true. And those are all protecting us from the bad bacteria. This is why, too, and this is how recent this is, have you noticed that they've begun to say, don't do Listerine anymore? Anyone see that? Don't swish your mouth with Listerine anymore. Because again, the same idea, we've got to be clean. We've got to spray bleach on all our surfaces and rid our households of all bacterial elements. That is a huge mistake. You should not do that. You want to live with your bacteria. You should not swish alcohol in your mouth to kill all the bacteria in your mouth. It sounded like a great idea for decades. My teeth will be all sparkly clean, and I'll have fresh breath, and the bacteria that cause bad breath won't be a problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now they're saying, don't do that because you have 1 billion bacteria living in you, and you want them to thrive. You want them to thrive. The type of soap that you use when you clean your body. Interestingly, the microbiome of your skin is not purely superficial. It actually is down into the dermis. And so a lot of the bacteria that inhabit our skin, it's like a whole city. Everywhere you look on your skin, it's a whole city of other elements which are not human, which are shared. We are a host of all these shared elements. When we wash, if we use the proper soap, we're not destroying the bacteria of our skin. We want the bacteria of our skin to be balanced. And so that's why some people decided they weren't going to take a shower except for like once a month or something. We used to think that in like the Middle Ages, everyone must have stunk really bad because they didn't wash like us, right? We get showers every day, sometimes 2 showers. If you work out, you might wake up in the morning, take a shower, go to work, go to school, whatever you got to do a workout after work, take another shower. You can have 2 or 3 showers a day in our culture. So we assume that if you don't bathe like that, you must be horribly dirty. But when we've actually overcome our prejudices about these sorts of things and studied people that like don't bathe for like a month, they don't stink. And the reason they don't stink is because your bacteria, your skin bacteria, especially in the underarms and other areas where we expect that odor, they actually balance out over time. So a healthy biome means that you've got all the right bacteria going on. All right, so why are we talking about all this? We're talking about this because it means we're connected in ways that we can't see. We're connected in ways that even medically and scientifically, we're still discovering the wonders of those connections. When we say that male and female are to be united, again, think about that kiss. A single kiss between a male and a female, they share 30 million bacteria between them. To unite heaven and earth, to unite the inhabited land and paradise, we're connected to these things, and we're connected in ways that are deeper than we realize, okay? It's a physical connection. We are biologically connected. By sharing this space together, we're biologically connected. And one of the reasons I wanted to return to this was that Marilyn said, as she came up to kiss the cross at liturgy last week, there's so much going on here we didn't know about. And that was, and I hadn't thought about it. I was like, oh my goodness, she's right. We're all kissing the cross, you know? I made the comment that when you're in a room with people, you're all swapping spit, okay? Because when we speak, all this vapor, all these particles are going out. And some of them are heavy and they drop very quickly. And some of them are light and they go out further. But when you are face to face with somebody, you're sharing that space. And what's in my body is going into your body, and what's in your body is going into my body. And here we come into the church, and notice how we manage the space between us. When we do incense, when we sense the people, when we sense the space, there's a lot of different meanings of that, and we talked about that a bit last year. But one of the things is we are completing the space between us and uniting ourselves in a fragrance, right? The space between us is now, there's a connection being made, a smoke connection, if you will, of fragrance, a beautiful, beautiful fragrance. And there's probably oils and other things that are being released when that incense is burning on charcoal and it's giving up its smoke. There's other things. We're connecting the space between us. And very interestingly, we have that sense of the fragrance of paradise. So that's one of the things we're saying is now we're in paradise, and to be in a space connected by incense is to begin to experience the joy of uniting paradise and the inhabited world, right? Now the fragrance of paradise is coming and it's uniting us. But we're also kissing the cross together, right? When we kiss the cross together, we are actually sharing a sort of microbiome moment there. And if everything else is okay, there's no problem with that. Some people, there is a problem with that. They're hesitant, you know. I don't know, germs, and I was always taught you don't want to spread germs, and you don't want to be, you know, other people's spit and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, we understand that, but notice how we do that and how we are physically changing as a result of being in the midst of one another. It's a very, very powerful thing. Any questions or any other examples of these sorts of things that anyone has on their minds right now? Was that? Yes, of course. In the communion spoon, and the question of COVID and the communion spoon, and the which of course was very challenging for many people. What do we do? And remains challenging for some people, where they wonder, should you use a spoon ever? You know, should you share a spoon ever with other people? And yet, what does it fundamentally say? Even though we know historically that the use of the spoon was something like 12th century, 11th century in its development. It's not like it's not like Jesus at the Last Supper pulled out a spoon. We know that. but it's become part of our sacred tradition. It's part of that image of in Isaiah's vision of the angel of God coming forward and placing the particle in his mouth. And so there's that idea of the priest with the spoon placing the particle in our mouth. There's a whole iconography there that's going on. But yeah, we're sharing that. And what does it say? It means we're a family. It means we're a family. And here's another interesting part about all this. And it has to do with, well, who shouldn't share the spoon? Right? Who shouldn't receive communion? Who should you eat with and who should you not eat with? In the ancient world, there were sometimes conflicting ideas of this idea of sitting down at table and eating face-to-face with somebody. We're going to see that today in the gospel, which is Zacchaeus. This is Zacchaeus Sunday. And what do oftentimes the Pharisees say about Jesus? He has gone to eat and drink in the house of a sinner. Right? What does it mean to go into a house, somebody else's house, to sit with them face to face and to eat and drink? Right? It means to be in communion. It means you're saying, we're together. I'm part of you and you're part of me. And when we start thinking again about that in the microbiome, we realize, oh my goodness, that's like even a biological reality. To share that space with each other is deeper than we realize. So in the ancient world, there's like conflicting ideas. On the one hand, if you knew someone was a sinner, if you knew someone was an infidel or a heretic, you did not eat with them. You did not gather with them. You did not allow them into your home. You did not want the contagion of their heresy to spread to you. And though they did not understand the sort of biological dimension of this, in a lot of ways they did. So much of the law is really biological. So much of the Mosaic law is about preventing the spread of contagion. And that contagion can be a skin condition that you have that you don't want to spread to other people, but it also can be a mold growing in the walls of your house. And you better get everybody out, and you better shut up the house for 7 days, and you better protect everybody because this might be one of those dangerous molds or dangerous fungus or dangerous bacteria that will actually cause harm. So they actually understood intuitively how important all of this stuff was. So in a certain level, if you knew that someone was not of you, then that meant you did not meet with them, you did not eat with them, you did not join in communion with them. And in the church, of course, if you were not baptized in the early church, you never saw the Eucharistic service. You saw the first part, you heard the prayers, you heard the reading of Scripture, you heard the teaching and the homily, and then you left, right? We talked about this last year. You left. Only those who had prepared themselves, who were, number one, were baptized and who were properly prepared and who were not wrestling with various serious sins, were actually permitted even to enter the space. So here again, there's an idea of shared space. There's an idea of who are we gathering together with? Who do we share the spoon with? This gets a little bit confused later on when, really technically anyone could walk through that door today. We don't know who they are. I can ask them at the chalice, are you Orthodox? They said yes, so okay, we'll receive communion. But of course, in the early church, that would have been inconceivable. They would have known exactly who everybody was. It was a family, right? So that's why there's an important dimension to all this, and I'm not just sort of I hope I'm not going off on some weird tangent for most of you, but it's the mystery of our connectedness, our interconnectedness, and it's the mystery of what it means that Christ will be the one to unite the 5 divisions in himself. And we, being united to Christ, will therefore be united in and through Christ to each other in an even more intimate way than our shared gut bacteria from from kissing the cross and having a spoon and breathing and speaking in each other's presence. You see, Christ is the one who unites us. But we have to get over this idea that the human person is this autonomous entity, that I am, even in my biology, I'm just me and you're you, and we can kind of keep a little distance and There's nothing shared between us. There's meant to be shared, all of this between us. Again, the beauty of family life is living in shared space that literally changes our biology. It literally changes our biology. And I don't know how, I mentioned the mystery of how sometimes people that have been married for like 40 or 50 years begin to look the same. They begin to look similar. And I don't know if there's anything, I don't know if that's a provable hypothesis that simply living together and sharing that life on a even biological level for decades and decades and decades literally shapes your face, and it shapes your body, and it shapes the way that you smile. It shapes all the shortcuts of communication that you share with a spouse of many, many, many years. And so suddenly you look the same. I always thought this was true of George W. Bush and Laura Bush. If you watch the two of them smile together, you're like, oh my goodness, they're like twins. You know, it's really, really stunning. But it happens. People begin to look similar to each other the longer they live with each other. So, I mentioned last week our little homework was the deesis, the icon of the deesis. Does anyone know what that is? What is the deesis? Yes? Right, so it's Christ enthroned, and on one side is the Theotokos, the Virgin Mary, on the other side is St. John the Baptist. And this gets back to the temptations of Christ and the meaning of theophany and how that helps shape our understanding of the fall. If the human vocation is to unite these divisions, then we can see in the temptations of Christ in the desert after his baptism that the enemy, Satan, is going to tempt him with precisely the failure of bridging these divisions. What does he tempt him with? He tempts him with food. He tempts him with power, basically, and he tempts him with wealth and fame, all those things. And food, power, wealth, fame, all those temptations are essentially saying, misuse your relationship to creation for your own benefit and so that I may be worshipped. That's in a nutshell what Satan is saying to Jesus when he tries to tempt him to not unite the five divisions, not to bring together in love and communion all that is and all that has been created to the glory of God. No, use your power for yourself. You're hungry? Why should you be hungry? Turn the stone into bread. Use your power to satisfy your body. Obey your body. And Christ is saying, man shall not live by bread alone. I will not misuse that relationship. I will not simply say, because I can turn the stone into bread, and he could turn the stone into bread. You know, he turns other things into other. He turns water into wine. He multiplies loaves and fishes, but he's not doing those things for himself. He's doing those things to manifest the glory of the Father, right? He's doing those things not to satisfy his own desires. What Satan is tempting him to do is satisfy yourself, satisfy your wants, satisfy your hunger, and overstep your boundaries so that this can happen. Same thing with the others, with power. Throw yourself down off the temple walls and have the angels of God come and bear you up. Again, just to sort of prove to everybody that you are who you are. No, Christ goes to the cross to demonstrate he is who he is. He doesn't have the angels miraculously sweep him up in some kind of show of power. All right, that gets into the intelligible powers and the heaven and earth, fame and wealth. If you worship me, what does Satan want? Satan wants creation to bend to his will and to worship him instead of to be for the communion and glorification of God. Because according to the Fathers, this is the great mystery. We're talking about the body, and I know I've said this many times, but according to the Fathers, the fallen angels, Satan and the fallen angels, were jealous of the human body because they saw that it was through the body that God would commune with creation in this unfathomable, even to the angels, dimension of love. And many angels, of course, rejoiced, the faithful angels, but some angels said, no, we want that. We want a body. And so then that's the whole idea of idolatry in creation, the idea of inhabiting a statue, breathing into the statue, and then the statue becoming the locus of a spiritual presence that you then worship so that you can get that spirit to do what you want. And that's the essence of idolatry. So this is the contest, the overall contest, and at its heart is the human misusing their place within creation. That's what Satan tries to get Christ to do, and we'll see that that's what Satan tries and succeeds in getting Adam and Eve to do by breaking their relationship to almost all of these natural created divisions, by severing the proper relationship. And of course, we can see, perhaps most especially, and we'll start looking at this next week, the relationship between the male and the female. But speaking to that a little bit more, what is the feast day right after Theophany? Literally the day after Theophany, what feast is it? Anyone remember? Right, the Synaxis of St. John the Baptist. That is a parallelism, what we call a liturgical parallelism to what is the feast day immediately the day after Nativity. Everyone knows this one. Most of us know this one. The Synaxis of the Theotokos, right. So, in both of those cases, we have the Theotokos, right, the day after Nativity. We have John the Baptist, the day after Theophany. There's a reason for that. What does the word Synaxis mean? Synaxis means a gathering. That's what a Synaxis is. It literally means to gather together. And interestingly, for both the Theotokos and St. John, they have multiple feasts throughout the calendar year. Both of them have several feasts. But the feast that gathers them all together is their relationship to Christ in his nativity and in his theophany. Okay? So those are the only, correct me if I'm wrong about this, I think I'm right about this. There's only two saints that have a Synaxis. There's a Synaxis of the archangels, the angels and archangels, but it's a little different because it's all of them together. The Synaxis of St. John in relationship to the Theotokos and to Theophany, and the Synaxis of the Theotokos in relation to the birth of Christ are liturgical parallelism. There's another parallelism between those two, and that is that there are feasts that only those two share. There's one particular feast, one particular event in their life that we only recognize beyond, except for Christ, those two. Can you guess which one it is? Conception. Yeah. Who said that? Okay. Deacon Stephen, of course. Right. We celebrate the conception of St. John the Baptist. We celebrate the conception of the Theotokos. It's not an immaculate conception, and we've talked about that in our book study when we talked about Roman Catholicism. I don't want to go down that path right now. But we also have a parallelism outside of Christ himself, of course, at the Annunciation. The conception of St. John and the conception of Theotokos are also celebrated. So that leads us to the Deesis and the importance of the Deesis, which is this icon of Christ enthroned with the Theotokos on one side and St. John on the other, knowing that there are these overlapping parallels, if you will, of their feasts. One of the things we begin to understand is that to be united to Christ is to become a whole person. And, maybe I'm sort of approaching this out of order, and I'm going to just start with this, and then we're going to close a little early because I have a few things to do in the altar yet. But in the monastic life, particularly on Mount Athos, there's an interesting phenomenon. On Mount Athos, no female human beings are permitted, and no female animals are permitted. But it's the Garden of the Theotokos. Okay? So you have this absolute, no females allowed, but it's the Garden of the Theotokos. And if you read the monastic literature of Mount Athos, one of the things those monks experience, the male monks of Mount Athos experience, is that having received a new name and having severed their ties to their family, and this is very, very interesting, thinking about the ways we're connected. What do? Monks jettison their family name. That's why people get angry when their children become monks, because the family name goes out the window. They receive a new first name, usually after, of course, a saint, and they take the men of Mount Athos, the male monastics, take the Theotokos as their mother. They take the Theotokos as their mother. And there's a sense in which, though femininity, the feminine creature, either male or other, or female or human or otherwise, is what I'm trying to say, is not permitted, nevertheless, there is this pervasive feminine presence on Mount Athos that completes the humanity of the monastics who dwell there, the male monastics who dwell there. And why is that? As we start to look in and start tie together our understanding of the creation of the human person and the fall of the human person is a male-female unity. In order to be a full human person, you must embody within yourself the full spectrum of the human charismas. And there is a feminine charisma and there is a masculine charisma. And while we see the division of Adam into Eve and the mystery of Eve being a portion of his body, and again, think of this biologically, the way we've been thinking about the biome and all these sorts of things. If you separate Eve biologically from Adam, what you're saying is that this mystery of love is so worthy of creation itself that even before the fall, the sheer joy of Adam being able to move towards Eve to come together and complete and make a whole, a unification, is a beautiful thing. That's the movement of creation itself towards God. That's the whole point of it, the movement of one to the other in an event or a communion of love. So we see that in the human person, and what that means is a complete human person is a male-female unity. We understand then the sacredness of holy matrimony through that. This is why marriage is a good thing. Marriage is a good thing because a man and a woman come together and they form a complete whole. And the longer they stay together and they're sharing their biology and everything else, they're literally completing each other until they begin to complete each other's sentences and know what the other is thinking and even look similar to each other in certain ways, all right? But for the monastic, they don't have that, do they? Or do they? Can the person who's not married physically in the world become a whole human person? And I think this is the mystery of the deesis. And the importance of this, for just to look at this in a little snapshot before we go deeper into the fall, is to recognize that even in as monastics, monastics being not married in the world, when they are joined to Christ, they are joined to all who are also joined to Christ. And this is a marriage. This is what we call the mystical marriage. We read this book last year. Remember our book study during Great Lent, The Mystical Marriage by Elder Emilianos, a collection of his talks. This is the mystical marriage that completes us. And for the male monastic, the feminine charisms of the Theotokos are embodied and embraced. And for the female monastic, the masculine characteristics of St. John the Baptist are also embraced and complete their femininity. And so ideally, each person in their full health begins to realize in Christ the whole spectrum of the gifts and begins to unite in themselves, male and female. So you see in the deesis, you have the male and the female for whom we celebrate their synaxis and their conception, united in Christ, and that's happening in each and every one of us. We're called to become the unification of all these gifts, not to set them at enmity towards each other, which is our typical way of dealing with male-female issues, not to make it a power struggle, one of the things that makes our whole world sick today, but because of failures on both sides, but to unite in ourselves the completeness of the human person in Christ. That's our vocation, and that means that even if we're alone, we can be whole. Even if we're alone, we can be whole because we are joined to Christ. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. All right, we'll continue on this next week. We're going to just get right into the garden and the fall and what the enemy's doing in the garden and everything else. But try to hold all these things together because we're going to keep them coming back around.